Well, welcome to another episode of From Garage to Growth. I'm your host, Brad Rue, and today we have this awesome, dynamic duo couple, Jamie and Dan Wieting Family Funeral Homes, and great people. Excited for this interview. There's a lot of history here, and you guys come from this really long line, I would say, between your dad and your grandpa, right? Kind of doing this whole mortuary business for, gosh, when was it, like in the 50s?
50,
Right.
54.
54. So we're not going to hash over the entire history because you can all read about that on their website, which we'll include in the show notes. But I'd love to hear, starting out at least, what was your genesis, Dan, of getting into it? You know, because this is your guys' story now and your legacy to carry on. What was the genesis of you starting into this business with your dad? And then, Jamie, like, when did you come in and kind of go, yeah, I want to be part of this? Help me start there.
When I was actually about 12 years old, I had grown up, obviously, in the funeral home, watching my grandfather, my dad, my uncle serve communities and serve families. And I came home, I said, Dad, you know, I think I want to be an undertaker. And he said, great, we can get you a suit and you can start tomorrow. So I did start helping out in the funeral home with simple tasks, and I'd help him with funerals like on weekends and things. Mm-hmm. So that was really the start. And ultimately I did obviously go to mortuary school, and I graduated in 2001, which is when I got my license.
Is that a 4-year degree, or how does that work for mortuary school?
In Wisconsin, there, at least when I went, the laws have kind of changed since then, but when I went, you had to have a full year worth of college credits before you could get into mortuary school. And then mortuary school was a 2-year program. So it's an associate's degree.
Okay.
Plus a full year of apprenticeship. And you could work some of that apprenticeship
while
within those schooling years.
Sure.
But there's specific hour requirements that the state has set forth for that.
And then you can get your actual licensure to be a certified mortuary.
Correct. You pass a national exam and also a state exam.
Is there like continuing education and stuff you got to do on top of that to keep your license up?
Yes. Every 2 years we have to have so many continuing ed credits.
Sure.
For reporting.
Nice.
So in different categories.
So that was you like, okay, I'm in, Dad.
Yep. And immediately after school, actually, when I was in school, I never worked here. I didn't do any of my apprenticeship with Dad.
Where did you do your apprenticeship at?
I worked in Waukesha, Plymouth, and West Bend.
How did you get in with those?
Just called and asked
just
if
like,
they
hey,
wanted
help.
Yeah, do you want an apprentice?
Nice.
They all were gracious enough to take me on. Part of the reason that I wanted to do that, it was really important to me because I already had a good idea how our family had been operating and doing things.
Sure.
So I wanted to learn from somebody else, like maybe, obviously there's other ideas and practices out there. So that was the reason. And I did. I picked up a lot of new things or different things. I also learned some stuff what not to do. Mm-hmm. You know, you see interacting with different bosses and how they work with families and things, and it's like, it's not, I promise I'll never do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which are good,
those habits back.
Yeah, which are good lessons too.
Sure.
So once I did come back home and start working, there were obviously tasks that got turned over to me, and one of them was lots of paperwork, which nobody goes into any job wanting to do paperwork. And it was during that time that I married Jamie, and she saw this paperwork piling up behind me, and I was avoiding it, and I'll turn it over to you. That's kind of where you
enter Jamie.
That's kind of how I got started. Was we just had a baby. I have a bachelor's degree in early childhood education.
Oh, okay.
So nice. I taught for a little while after school, but we had our first baby coming almost directly out of college to her shortly after we got married. When she napped, there's only so many times you can vacuum the floor.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, what do I do staying home, right? So I kind of gravitated over here because we live here at the funeral home. She came with.
Short commute.
Short commute, yep. Bring her along to work while she napped kind of thing. Found this paperwork, and I'm like, we gotta do this. Why isn't this happening?
Stay on top of it.
Yeah, so I slowly kind of trickled in like, a couple hours a day, caught up on things as he could focus more on families and serving and making that part of the business, the face of the business kind of grow. And I stayed behind scenes and did the part that he didn't like, right? Filing or billing or things like that. So that's how I initially started. I tacked on more hours and more hours as the kids got older, had more kids, made sure that I just time managed myself to be able to get the jobs that I needed to done here as well. As we grew, I got more jobs and then decided that I wasn't going back to teaching after our kids were all in school and kind of a now what for us. So that's when I decided that when our kids were in school.
4 kids later.
4 kids later, yep. When our 4th baby went to 4K, I went back to college and finished my associate's degree with education too. And now with being home and mom and business, going to school every day was kind of hard. So at that time, they were just starting the online programs for mortuary science.
Nice. Okay.
One of the first ones was through Florida. So I flew down there a couple times just to prove that I could.
I didn't go.
I was saying,
Wasn't invited.
It was a short 24-hour trip. Like it was a get your stuff done and go, to prove that I was actually doing what I was doing and I could take the online courses, the tests and things online, but they wanted to be able to prove that I could do the skills that I had to do. I didn't work anywhere else but here.
No apprenticeship around the
No,
area?
I did my apprenticeship, but it was through Wietings.
So what does that ultimately help for the licensure end of things? I mean, because you have people working in funeral homes that don't have that. What does it allow you to do?
A license in Wisconsin, you need a license to transfer a deceased individual into our care. So like if we went to, say, a nursing home or a hospital, you need to be licensed. An apprentice does allow for that, but there's a short window of time that you can still be an apprentice, then it comes to an end. Whereas a licensed funeral director, once you're licensed, assuming you keep up your credits, it's indefinite. Also embalming, you need to be a licensed embalmer director.
Is that another skill set, or is that all included in the same license?
In Wisconsin, it's a dual license, meaning you can't have one without the other.
Okay.
There are other states where there's separate licenses. So I could just be only an embalmer, but I'm not allowed to
Take the body and
Correct.
transport it and whatnot.
And another thing is you can't meet with families without a license in the state
Oh.
of Wisconsin. So to sit down at an arrangement table at that time of need, I wasn't able to do that. I knew the answers, I could do it, it wasn't finished. So that was why it was important for me to do it. However, not
Share that
everybody has to
responsibility
be.
if you need to.
Yep.
and then
absolutely.
also conducting a funeral.
Okay.
So you need to have a licensed funeral director. If you've hired a funeral home, you need to have a licensed funeral director at the funeral.
Oh, nobody knows those things. That's
Yeah.
cool.
Let's say, for instance, we had a visitation here at the funeral home, and that was at, say, like on a Wednesday evening. You, Brad, could do that without a license.
'Cause it's just a visitation
Just the
and-
visitation, but if it turned into a funeral, then you need a director on staff to be present.
I learned so much.
Yeah.
Who knew?
So, okay, so that gets you up to speed on being here. And I know your dad and mom are still involved or not too much, like emeritus status?
Yeah, emeritus status
Yeah.
is really good. Dad still carries his license, so when we get into just scheduling conflicts, he's still really around to help us with some of that stuff.
You don't get to necessarily pick when someone dies in your schedule.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah.
We have no say in that matter. So he's around to help.
They're
when
both
we need
around
him.
for moral support and any support that we need.
Lots of prayers.
Yeah.
Help me understand the challenges that you've experienced coming in and helping, obviously starting with your dad and then transitioning the business to you. What have been some challenges that you were like, wow, we overcame some of that, or unique opportunities that you maybe were like, hey, Dad, we're not doing this, we should be doing this? What are some of those things that you've kind of changed or had to work through in the business so far?
To my dad's credit, we made a lot of changes, and he's pretty well been hands off with that. I mean, we look to him for advice, dad and mom, but hey, we've got this idea. What do you think?
And that really started from day one, from you coming
Right.
home from school. You can allude to our website. Websites were new.
Non-existent.
Right.
Yeah.
We were one of the first in the state to have a funeral home website. Like
Yeah.
who wants to go online and look at obituaries? Like that
And
was
now
just
that's all they do.
yeah. I mean, newspapers are kind of going the way of the dinosaur.
Right.
It's those kinds of things that there's challenges and there's lots of opportunities. We just don't necessarily always find them right away. But just kind of keeping your ear to the ground and paying attention to what even the public is saying and trying to find a solution for that basically in-house.
Now, with obituaries on your website, are those only obituaries of people that you've done or are doing funerals for?
Generally.
Generally,
Yeah, you can put another obituary on if you were served in a different part of the state or died in Florida, for instance, things like that. There are certain situations, but generally it's mostly families that we serve.
So what's your biggest challenge going forward, would you say, in this industry?
Getting out of bed in the morning. There's lots of changes when it comes to the needs and desires of the families that we're serving, because everybody comes to us with a different idea. So just being flexible and again coming up with new ideas. We get surprised a lot, like, oh, well, we've never had that request before, but it's completely doable.
And I think even just bridging the generational gaps that are coming, baby boomers are still burying their parents, and
Right.
we have the next generation burying the baby boomers. Bridging that gap because they think differently and they want different things and they see a different vision of what their funeral is supposed to look like. So a challenge is just making sure that we're on top of the industry and able to serve all of those aspects. Keeping up with technology is another big thing. You can't just not offer things because you don't know how. Even the video that's running behind you, that was new to the industry at one time, and oh my gosh, you can do all these things, and
Like
now
the photo montage
right,
kind of thing.
right. And now if you don't have it, it's like, well, why don't you do that, right? So it's keeping up with all
Or
the
shop around.
right, keeping up with the trends of what's new, what can we do, what more can we offer for personalization. Again, you're not just serving one dynamic in one generation. We really have multiple generations,
Right.
and especially as we're changing generations in the next 10 years.
Right. It's not the old, well, we got 3 different flavors of casket. Which one do you want?
Right, exactly.
Well, and that's what it used to be. Even when I was a kid growing up, that's all it was.
We got
right?
A, B, and C. Which one do you want?
Yeah, a family would come in, you'd get basic vital information, enough to put together a short obituary, figure out when the service was going to be, and okay, pick out your casket, and that was it. Now it's way more in depth. I mean, we try to really make it specific to this person in the best way that we can.
Right, and what their family wants and what they want.
The creative side, and then adding in all the other little touches along the way that make it even more of an experience.
And still do what it is that we're actually called to do, and that's to facilitate that whole grieving process.
You mentioned before we started that you have some changes or a lot going on within the business. Anything you want to highlight?
We do have a lot going on with keeping up with the industry as far as changes and what needs are. There's 2 different things that we are highlighting or can highlight now and started, and one is we are putting an actual crematory here on our grounds.
Oh, wow.
We still and will always offer cremation, but the cremation didn't actually happen here on this property. So now it's all going to be here and kind of doing some remodel and being able to offer that service without anybody's care leaving our care or anybody leaving our care during that time. So that's one thing that construction is happening as we speak. And so that's exciting in our world of change, and as different trends are happening, we realized that it was a time to move forward with keeping everything here.
What does that do for you versus outsourcing it?
Probably not a whole lot from us, but it brings the families that we're serving comfort knowing, okay, my loved one isn't actually leaving the funeral home.
Sure.
Yeah, the care of Wietings.
Like, we're not sending the parts out to get fixed someplace else,
Right.
and we'll expect them back in a week. You
Yeah.
know.
Well, it was always a good relationship that we had for
Yeah.
outsourcing too.
Yeah, that wasn't the reason. It was just, again, just that extra layer
Big peace of mind knowing
Yeah.
like, hey, they will take care of everything here,
Right.
and my loved one will stay there.
And the cremation rate is rising in the Midwest too. You know, we've seen it for decades ago that the coasts, the East Coast and West Coast, were definitely higher cremation rate. That doesn't mean that there's still not traditional viewings and services, but cremation after you have that traditional service is higher than it used to be. So people are, after that service is complete and they have a viewing and a full service, the cremation takes place after. So a little more unique that not everybody's going to necessarily being buried in a cemetery, whether they have cremated remains or not. So that trend is shifting, and another reason why, you know, more cremation rate is higher, maybe now is the time to keep things here.
You said there was a second one.
We do, yeah. So
Speaking of bridging generation gaps.
yeah, and this is a big generation gap. Again, our East Coast and West Coast are a little ahead of our game. I'm actually the president of OGR, which is an Order of the Golden Rule Funeral Association, Funeral Director Association. So we get together quarterly, and discussion happens during those meetings, and what's everybody doing in trends, and you learn from each other. And they're from all over the United States that we meet with. And one of those ideas that I guess we're bringing back to Northeast Wisconsin or Wisconsin in general is more of an online arranging, different than coming to a funeral home.
Sure.
This is strictly a cremation business of families that don't want services, no write-ups in newspapers, things like that. So it's a different business altogether.
Yeah.
I can let you expand
can-
on that a little more.
The idea is, okay, this might be uncomfortable for me at the time, right? And I can do all of this from the comfort of my living room
Sure.
without actually having to interact with those scary funeral directors. So,
Scary.
right.
Yeah.
So that is really the idea,
It's like a self-service option.
right?
Yeah.
Kind of, yeah.
Kind of.
But it's still through a licensed funeral home, and it's under the direction of a licensed funeral director.
Like you said, bridging that gap. I would imagine more of like the younger generation burying their parents. Talking with my wife, for example, and we don't have a funeral plot, right? Like we're probably not going to go that route of carving out a place next to my parents. It's just not the way we think. So having those different options of how do I want to take care of my, or I guess it would be my kids taking care of me, is going to look very different, I imagine, than like my grandfather, who's had a spot picked out for 25 years next to my grandma. And that's interesting that you say that, because yeah, I think as we move to that more digital environment post-COVID, right, which accelerated everything, you're going to have to adapt, right? Because people are looking for a path that fits them, and if you don't offer it, even if it's not the path that maybe is most ideal from the care and the grieving process and the person-to-person interaction, I agree with you. I think that's fantastic that you're branching out and bringing new ideas in.
Yeah, and it's always trying to stay ahead of the curve and those trends and things. Just, I mean, I'll be really honest. I don't want to go in that direction personally, but I'm not the be-all, end-all when it comes to other
Yeah.
people's decisions.
I think that's what we realized when we wanted this uniqueness of a different branch necessarily. You get to serve everybody then, because there's definitely different people that want this versus this. And we're realizing those trends that are now coming, again, to the Midwest more of, well, I can do this or I can do that. And it's completely different service points of what are you looking for, because we have an option for you.
Yeah.
It's just offering more
You
to our
mentioned
families.
the Order of the Golden Rule. And I've heard your dad mention that before in our visits. Help me understand that, and for our listeners, why is that important to be a part of? Are all funeral homes in the area a part of it, or are you required to be a part of it? What does that organization do, and how does it help you guys?
The International Order of the Golden Rule is an international funeral director association that stands by service measured by the Golden Rule, meaning serving others as you would want to be served. No, you aren't required to be a member of that. In fact, it's kind of a elite group of funeral homes. To my knowledge, I think we're the only ones, at least locally, that's a member. But just in the past month, Jamie was elected as president of.
It's exciting.
Right here in the Midwest.
And with other associations too, we want to be part of this group. Again, we've learned so much. It offers continuing education, which we need, but it also has that camaraderie with other funeral directors around the United States, around the globe, that you learn from. I mean, even if it's just conversations over dinner, you're learning something. And when you get a group of funeral directors together, you can't not talk funerals in the industry. I think it's virtually impossible. Just like we're members of our state association, so the Wisconsin Funeral Directors Association, which Dan is a past president as well
You're
as
sitting in
yeah,
royalty.
yeah,
Presence
yeah.
of
I was gonna
royalty
say,
here.
I don't have any presidents in here. I'll have to work on that.
And we're also members of NFDA, which is a National Funeral Director Association again. All those memberships, it's not just a tag on the wall for us. We're actively involved, and they offer different things. Continuing education, Wisconsin's just strictly the Wisconsin Funeral Directors, so you learn about your state, who can help you around the state, what other people are offering.
The rules, the changes.
Yeah,
whatever within your
laws,
state.
absolutely. So there's different reasons for being parts of different organizations. This OGR group is just near and dear to our hearts. His dad was also a past president as well. It offers good connections with other people, and when in the industry that's so sensitive to serving others, we really got to keep up with ourselves too, and what's changing and why, and we all have the same values for that group of how we want to serve families. So I think that's what's most important with the group, is that our values are the same, but yet we can discuss freely of how we get there and what we can do to better ourselves and our community.
How do you see Wieting Funeral Home impacting the community the most?
I would say service. That's something that we never want to lose sight of. We want to make sure that each family is served to the utmost respect and dignity that they deserve, and tell their life story. And so that grieving process can get started, because it's so important. So important. And when that's lost, it's hard for people to move forward.
Yeah.
So I think service. And to make things easier, a lot of people say, like, why do you, it's so hard and exhausting. And yeah, serving families is exhausting, and every job's exhausting.
We get to serve our community and get the fulfillment of serving others. When somebody you love dies, you're really at a loss. You think that you know that this might be coming. Sometimes, obviously, you don't. But even if you know that it's going to be happening, it's kind of like a, now what? I have no idea. So we're able to offer that stability too. Like, we'll just call Wietings and
They got it. They know what to do.
Right.
And it's true. Like, they'll call us and they say, "You're going to do that?" "Yes, we got you. All you need to do right now is take care of you and notify your families." That's what this time is about too, and special relationships that you have. We got the rest. We'll take care of everything else for you.
go be with your family. Do that.
And it does. It gives us fulfillment knowing that I can help you during this time. I can't make the pain go away. I can't make the grief go away, but I can help you get to the funeral service, or get to see your loved one again, or, these processes along the way, or file the paperwork, as simple as it seems, right?
That was filing up.
Yeah. So it's a good sense of feeling of, I can help during this time when most people don't know what to do.
What would you say to a younger person, or maybe a younger Dan, right? What's some advice you would go back and give yourself starting off, or maybe encouragement? What would it be?
Listen. Just keep listening. I mean, if you're serious about getting into this profession, just listen. Immerse yourself in everything that you can.
Jamie, any advice you go back and give to young Dan?
Right. That list is really long.
I still
I don't think we have enough time.
I still tell old Dan to listen. Listen to your wife. He kind of hits it right there. Is just listening to your families, listening to what's happening around you. You learn a lot and you can move forward just by being observant of what's going on around us and how we can keep bettering ourselves.
What would you say to someone that's like, hey, I'm interested in mortuary science and doing this for a living? What would you say to that young person? Or old person, career
Yeah.
change, right?
Career change. Actually, there's a lot of career changes, but yeah, it's a rewarding profession. But understand that it's not just standing around in a suit, right? Like there's actual work and long hours that go into this. So just be prepared. But again, immerse yourself, and if you're serious about it, let's get you on the track and can figure out.
Is
as
there
you
any
go.
like artistic eye? Because I know you occasionally will do reconstructive, and you're like a what do I want to say, like a Hollywood makeup artist, in a sense. Is there anything skill set wise that would lend itself to this career?
Yeah, there's definitely things that you can point to, right? Like the canon of beauty. That's concrete. I know what that is. But then there's also stuff that I can't explain, but it's just you look at it and you know something is right or isn't right. Mm-hmm. And then it's a matter of how do we adjust for that.
And I think also patience. We can't rush through any of these processes. They still have to be done a certain way. Having the patience to make sure that you do things right the first time. So that's important as we look forward and go forward too.
Being methodical, following the plan.
And those plans are consistently disrupted.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a side story. I really, believe it or not, like that about this is I think that everything is all A-okay, squared away. This is going to go off without any hitch. And those plans are continually just surprise. Even showing up, say, to a church in procession, and you put out no parking signs, there's a funeral coming, and then there's 3 cars parked in the way, and I've got 20 cars behind me. Now what? Right? You have to be able to think really quickly on your feet and make adjustments on the fly.
Troubleshoot.
Anybody who wants to go into the career, is looking into the career, I encourage them to get into a funeral home and at least see what it's like. It's not a 9-to-5 job, it's not an 8-to-4 job. It's exhausting, but to know to take care of yourself too, when you need to as well.
Like I mentioned to you before, you can come and sit visitations, cut lawn, right? I mean, wash vehicles. It's nonstop.
And we're unique to the industry because we're small enough, but yet large enough that we don't have somebody who just washes our vehicles. So we do it, right? Some of us do it better than others.
You wear a lot of hats.
We do.
Like most small business owners,
Correct.
you wear a lot of
Right.
hats.
And I think that's when he mentioned that you just don't come in to wear a suit. It's 100% true. Sometimes you'll walk in the office and we're not dressed like this every day. We're, sometimes dressed to work outside or wash vehicles or things like that. The next day we're, vacuuming or whatever. So you said it exactly right. You wear a lot of hats. It's not one consistent thing every day.
Always something new.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Well, any final thoughts for our viewership or listenership as far as the parting words to entrepreneurs out there and just things maybe for the community or parting thoughts?
I'd say for entrepreneurs, just try it. I mentioned before, learning what not to do was a really good lesson.
Sure.
And believe me, I mean, we've screwed up plenty from a business standpoint. Like, we made mistakes, but you learn from those and move on. So if you've got an idea, figure it out and run with it. Lord willing, you'll succeed, but maybe you won't. Then you'll get it right the next.
You'll learn along the way.
Right.
You'll definitely learn something whether you succeeded or not.
I think that's very true, and just to keep trying. We have faith that it's going to work out, or maybe it won't, but sitting still doesn't help us either, right?
No,
So to keep trying to change, and the older that we get, the more we don't like to learn new things either, right? So it comes true full circle, but we're still learning, and we know we still have to keep up with the times, keep up with the trends, keep up with all generations, even with working with new generations, we have to keep up with that because they communicate different than we do, and how they want to communicate is different. So I guess my advice is don't sit still. If you
Don't
really
stop.
want to do it, make it happen. And it might not be the right time. You know, we talked about putting our own crematory on our grounds 10 years ago, and it wasn't the right time. We decided at that time to put our funds and resources and knowledge into putting an elevator in this building in Chilton so that people could use the basement better, utilize it, as well as putting in a dining hall that serves 200 people. So that was success for us at that time. And you know, 4 years later, after 2016, we got COVID, and we can't have funeral lunches, and where can we go? And we need
So
a
much
big
for those things.
Well, we
Yeah,
needed a
right.
bigger meeting space. We were able to facilitate some of those things for smaller families
Sure.
that needed all of those things. So, you know, you have these big ideas, and we still have big ideas. Maybe the timing's not right. Maybe that's something in a few years. And now look at us almost 10 years later, 8 years later. We're like, okay, now is the time. Now makes sense, whether that be financially or the time in our children's lives of where we're at or retirement, whatever that may be. And same with this other opportunity as different branches that we serve. Like, it's just don't stop. Keep thinking. Keep looking outside the bubble.
Think big.
Dream big.
And then moderate.
Right.
Moonshot thinking, but then take the steps along the way.
And failure doesn't mean that it's the end, because there's bumps along the road and you learn from them, even though we don't want to. It's a good thing to learn from our mistakes or learn from the bumps along the road. So,
Excellent. Well, I appreciate you guys taking the time out of your day to
thanks.
give us a great interview. And for everyone listening, I hope you enjoyed this podcast, From Garage to Growth, Small Business Success Story with Dan and Jamie Wieting.
Thank you.
Thanks.